Okay, thank you, Abby. We'll be moving on to our next presentation. Catherine began working for the USGS while obtaining her doctorate in ecology in 2000. She gained skills in integrating disparate data sets of species location data and using these to generate spatially explicit models of species occurrence and abundance. Catherine has developed a research program to assist multiple agencies and groups with species distributions, focusing on invasive species, including model delivery through the Invasive Species Habitat tool, also known as INHABIT. Please welcome Catherine.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm going to get my screen shared here really quickly.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Great. All right, so I'm going to talk to you today about the INHABIT, or the Invasive Species Habitat Modeling tool that we've developed. And so what this is there's a lot of location data out there that people have collected.
1 second, Catherine, it's not full screen on your presentation.
No, it's not.
We're seeing your desktop.
Oh, is that good now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so there's lots of location data out there that people collect and often share with data aggregators like the EDD maps. But this information just tells you where species are that people have visited and doesn't really fill in the gaps across the landscape. And we also know that there's lots of species that are not native and are coming into the US. And so just as a couple of examples, what the top graph that I'm showing there is year, starting prior to 1800, and then the number of first records for vascular plant species. And so this is the first time that we have a record for a species being recorded in the US. And so as we can see is that there are a lot more records that have accumulated over time. And now there's around 4,000 introduced vascular plant species within the US. And so what we're trying to do is really help people figure out where they should look for what species, because that's a pretty overwhelming number. And so we've worked on developing the Invasive Species Habitat tool, or INHABIT, which is a web tool. And where the idea for this came from is my research group was talking with the coordinators for the National Park Service invasive, remember the name, their invasive species teams that they have that are responsible for different numbers of Park Service units across the country and going in and helping manage invasive species problems within those park units. And so we were talking about what the needs of those teams are and what our research was, and we came up with this idea. And so here's a couple screenshots from the web tool. And right now what it contains is habitat suitability models for 221 manager selected terrestrial plants for the contiguous US. And so every single species that we've modeled and included in there is something that some manager somewhere has asked us to create a model for. So it's something, they're all species that someone is concerned about and trying to manage in some part of the country. And again, this web tool has been co-produced with management agencies. So we've had a lot of input from them about what we include within the tool. And it includes both map products, like the top screenshot here, that are at a 90-meter resolution. So if you zoom way in, you can get to a pretty fine scale for a more local area. And then there's also tabular summaries of these maps for species for management units or management areas. And these could be a county, it could be a national park, it could be a national forest, so all different types of units. And we're always open 2 suggestions of other types that might be useful for people that we could add in. But what these tabular summaries include is information on, how much of this management area is predicted to be suitable. And then we also integrate that information with known occurrences. And these known occurrences, again, are coming from these kind of data aggregators of location data like EDD maps. And so that information is only going to be as good as kind of information being shared up. So there might be more local knowledge that we're not able to capture there. So who's partnering on INHABIT? So I mentioned that it was started out by us talking with the National Park Service back in 2018, but over time we've had a lot more input from other federal agencies, some NGOs, and we've also had some input from, for example, county weed managers. And we're always open to having other people provide information and join us. We have stakeholder meetings, usually a couple times a year, that anybody is welcome to join, where we show kind of what's going on with INHABIT, what we're thinking about doing, and get feedback on the way the web tool looks, what else should we be incorporating, how we're presenting information to make it most useful to people working on the ground. So what are the habitat suitability models that are in this web tool? So as I've mentioned, we have point locations that we're getting from a lot of different data sources. And we aggregate those all together. So we have as much known locations for a species as possible. And then we pair those with predictor variables that describe environmental conditions across the country. And then those can be fed into these mathematical models that come up with predicted relationships between where things are and the environmental conditions. And then those can be used to make maps over space. So what type of information is going into the models? So what kind of environmental data? And so we have lots of different types of information that we're including. So we have solar insolation that gets at how much sunlight a location's receiving, temperature information, topography, atmospheric water, biotic interactions like tree cover, disturbance such as fire or human modification of the landscape, landscape water, and then substrate, so soil information. And what we've included with INHABIT has changed over time. So for example, we were talking with some Fish and Wildlife Service refuge managers in the Pacific Northwest, and they were concerned that we weren't doing a good job of capturing where water was on the landscape, and that's what defines a lot of the Fish and Wildlife refuges. And so we went back, and in our next version of INHABIT modeling, we included a lot more predictors related to where water was on the landscape. And they felt that that really improved those models and made them a lot more useful for them. So what is the web tool like? So here's a screenshot again of the mapping application. And there's in the top left a place that you can select a species of interest from those 221 species currently included within INHABIT. And then we have a place that you can select the type of map to display. And so with these maps, we're taking them, they're kind of continuous predictions, and we're making them more into where things might be where they aren't. And so the way that we do that, we can be more inclusive or less inclusive in making those. And so depending on what your intended use is, you might want to change that. And then we also have the ability to limit environmental extrapolation or not. And what that means is, let's say we have a species that's primarily found in Florida, and we use climate predictors to create that model. If we take that model that we fit for Florida with that climate data and we make predictions to Long Island, then those predictions might not be as good because the species hasn't experienced necessarily the climate in Long Island. So maybe that's an extreme case because a species that's in Florida, you might not expect to be able to occur in Long Island, but something in other parts of the country that maybe a newer species, maybe you would expect it to be able to occur there. And then we also have the ability for you to add on top of the predictions, the location data that was used to fit the model. So the location data that we had for the species, and then also defining kind of a range polygon of where we know that species occurs across the country. And then you can also zoom into a management area. And so I think I have a slide in a little bit that describes the different types of management areas we have here. But for example, here we've zoomed into a county in Wyoming. And so this allows you to zoom into your area of interest a lot more easily and see predictions for that area. So we also have the tabular summaries that I mentioned earlier. And so the first set of management summaries that we have are management summaries by species. And so again, here you can select a species of interest, and then it'll provide summary information for all different types of management units. And so in the table, we have the species name, we have the name of the unit, and then we have information on the amount of suitable area for that species in that unit. How much of that unit there's environmental extrapolation for, the number of records that have already been recorded for that species in the unit. And so this could be a really high number, like the top line here, or it could be 0. And then we also have information on the number of records within 50 miles, within 100 miles, and then the distance to the nearest record. So another way that we can filter these summary tables is by selecting a unit instead of a species and then getting summaries for all of the species for that management unit. So for example, here a national park has been selected, and then there's that summary information for all 221 species that have been recorded. So I mentioned we have several different management area types. So these include federal lands, counties, national forests, and then we'll have some state parks and state forests that are going to be added with a new release of INHABIT that we have coming up soon. And then there's another tab that provides information on model details that if you're interested in that, you can go in and look at, but these are more details about what environmental predictors were important for that species, how well the model performed, and that sort of information. So how have people been using INHABIT for management? And so I'm going to quickly go over a couple of different examples that have been identified by managers. And these include developing watch lists and where to search for new populations. So for thinking about watch lists, here I'm showing that summary table again, where I've selected Suffolk County, New York, to filter. And so the table showing the 221 species with their summaries for that county. And so that included 173 of the species that we have modeled had suitable habitat for this county. And then further looking at that, 80 of those hadn't been recorded in the county yet, at least according to the information that we have. And then we have this further filtering step called invaders at the doorstep, highlighted in red. And what this is filtering is for species that have suitability within the unit, that haven't been recorded in the unit, at least according to the aggregated information we have, but that also have records within 50 miles. And so those are species that we know occur within 50 miles of a boundary, haven't been recorded there, but have suitability. And so we call those invaders at the doorstep because they're species that we know are nearby, have suitable habitat. And so it's likely they may already be there or they may soon be there. And so those could be kind of early detection species for an area. So another way of looking at watch lists here, we've kind of summarized the number of species for counties in the state of New York. And so this map is showing the number of species with suitability for each county. And so some counties have a lot more than others, but there's still a lot of species there. We can subset that and say how many of those species that have suitability do we already know are present within those counties. And so again, this is from that aggregated occurrence data that we have. And so this lowers the number of species that we might be thinking about for a county. Another way that we can further reduce that number that we might be looking at is thinking about the number of species that are at the doorstep. So again, these are species that have suitable habitat within a county, don't have any records within that county, but have records within 50 miles of the county boundary. Another thing that we've been thinking about is more kind of regional early detection rapid response, thinking of species that might have secondary spread across a larger geographic area. And so what we're showing in this image is the number of species with suitability that haven't been recorded in the state yet. And so that might be a different type of watch lists that people might use for thinking about what species they should be on the lookout for establishing. Another type of use case that we've had people tell us about for INHABIT is thinking about where to search locally for populations of an invader of concern. And so I have a couple different examples here. So one is I'm located in Colorado near Rocky Mountain National Park, and we worked with them where we had our maps of habitat suitability for a few species that are relatively new to the park that they're concerned about, one of which being orange hawkweed. And we went and used these maps to go visit some areas that had higher suitability, and we did find a couple populations of the species there. And then another example that we've been given is from some managers in Joshua Tree National Park in California, where they were concerned about fountain grass. And they, the top image is showing the boundary of the park with the green box that we've zoomed into down below. And there was an area that was highlighted as being really high suitability for fountain grass that they hadn't visited before. And they went there and then did find some populations of fountain grass that then they could conduct treatments on. So those are kind of the use cases that we've worked with people on. And then I wanted to mention kind of another larger effort that INHABIT's involved in related to early detection and rapid response for invaders. So what I'm showing here is kind of the invasion curve over time, where you start out with the species introduction and the populations increase as the species grows and spreads. And then there's different activities that can be taken by management at those different stages. And so when you have a small number of localized populations, you potentially have the ability for eradication through early detection and rapid response activities. And so there's been an effort recently to develop a national early detection and rapid response framework. And this has been called for through different management plans and through the scientific literature to really put together something that could be worked on across agencies and across scales to prevent establishment of new species within the US. And so with funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've been putting together this national early detection map response framework, and kind of the working mission statement for this is listed here. So the mission is to find and eradicate invasive species new to the United States or those demonstrating secondary spread by coordinating across federal and non-federal partners and investing in innovative approaches for surveillance, data integration, and response capabilities for natural resource management. And so that statement kind of describes what the national framework is working towards. And this kind of unicycle thing on the left indicates kind of how this might be done. And so the framework is a sequence of coordinated and strategic actions that focuses capacity and investments on the right species in the right place at the right time with the right tool. And so what does this mean? So that unicycle thing is pretty complicated, but it can really be broken down into 4 main categories that develop a comprehensive early detection rapid response workflow. So planning, so what needs to be done, right place, right time, right species. And then having different tools to detect where species show up. And so this could include more traditional surveillance activities, but also there's a lot of work going on with environmental DNA to be able to detect things. Having a way to report when these things have been found. And so communication across different agencies is really important here. And then having the ability to respond. And so there's some small amounts of funds that are available for people to apply for to get funds to help them respond to a detection event. And so where INHABIT kind of fits in is helping out with that planning stage, both with developing watch lists and then also thinking about hotspots. So the maps that I showed of New York with the counties and the number of species there could be thought of kind of as a hotspot map of where what locations have the most suitability for species. So the federal agency contributions to this framework is assessing invasive risks internationally, nationally, and regionally, helping to facilitate communication, investing in cutting-edge technology to help with detection, and then creating systems, processes, and fundings that are available interjurisdictionally to help with reporting and response. So how does INHABIT kind of feed into some of these pieces? So when we first started with INHABIT, the Park Service invasive plant management teams gave us a list of suggested species. We started out with 30, and one of the species that they were really interested in was wavy leaf basket grass, which at that time there just wasn't enough occurrence data within the US yet for us to be able to fit a model, because it hadn't been here long enough and spread enough that there was enough information. And so new invasive species often have too few occurrences within the US to model, but we can make models using global occurrence records and then apply those to the US. And so we're doing this now using species suggestions from local experts for species such as wavy leaf basket grass, and then also from horizon scanning efforts. And so what these horizon scanning efforts are is looking at what species are being imported into the US that don't have established populations here yet. And then we can conduct a risk assessment, a quick risk assessment for those species to determine which ones might really pose a risk as becoming an impactful invader in the US. And those are species that we could be on the lookout for, or the Fish and Wildlife Service has the authority to prevent, to regulate what's being imported in, and so they could prevent the importation of some of those species. And so we'll be making models using a global extent for some of these species, and then incorporating those maps into INHABIT again to think about early detection for establishing the prevention of establishment of species that aren't here yet but might be problematic. And then another thing that we've been thinking about is the models in INHABIT right now, as I've mentioned, are based on presence information, so where species occur. But what we really care about is where species can become abundant, because they have more impact when they become abundant. And so I love using the example of cheatgrass, which is a huge problem in the Western US. And it's found in all 50 states, including out east and in New York, but it's not really a problem there because it doesn't become abundant. And so what we've been working on doing for the last few months is creating models for habitat suitability for where species could become abundant rather than just where they could occur. And so a lot of the data sets that we've obtained occurrence data from have some sort of information on abundance, but a lot of it's really messy. So I have a word cloud shown here that has a summary of data from the columns in the data that we have for abundance. And so this can include a numeric value, but it also has a lot of words such as single plant, majority, and then a mix of words and letters. And so there's not enough information there to create a true abundance to predict, percent cover for something on the landscape. But what we were able to do was take that information. And so we have all our occurrence locations. Then we can subset those to the occurrence locations that have some sort of information in them that we can say is saying that that location has 5% cover or greater. And so those we call our abundance locations. And then we can further subset that data to those that we say have high abundance. And so those locations are ones with some sort of abundance information that we can say is equivalent to greater than 25% cover. And so we have a new suite of models that we'll be releasing for INHABIT sometime over the summer. That will be for 259 species, including occurrence information. We'll have models for 217 species for where there's habitat suitability for abundance, and models for 189 species of where there's habitat suitability for high abundance. And so this is an example of what the maps will look like on the website. And so we've had some stakeholder meetings to talk about how we would present this information. And so there'll be 3 different options for maps that people can select for a single species. And so they can look at a map of suitability for occurrence, a map of suitability for greater than 5% cover, and a map of suitability for greater than 25% cover. And so this is just a zoom in to Colorado for that same species, showing those 3 different types of information. And so you can see the patterns of where the species might just occur aren't the same of where it might have high abundance. And then we can also combine thresholded models. So we can take the occurrence model, and it's has continuous values from 0 to 1, and we can say anything above a certain value we're going to say is where it's suitable, anything below that is where it's not suitable for occurrence, and make kind of that binary map of suitable, unsuitable. We can do that for all 3 model classes that we've created and then integrate those together. And so we can see areas where they're suitable for high abundance, and then areas that are suitable for abundance include those for high and for abundance. And then areas that are suitable for occurrence include those purple areas plus the blue and green. One thing we get asked about a lot is right now, INHABIT is limited to terrestrial plant species. And so we've been asked by a lot of different groups about creating models for aquatic species. And so we have a couple different projects we're working on right now, included one funded by the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, and another one funded by the Army Corps of Engineers, where we're developing a suite of predictor layers for lakes and a suite of predictor layers for streams. And we're currently in the process of fitting models for manager requested aquatic species that we can then add in to INHABIT. And so right now we're, the number of species we're modeling is down on the side, but we're modeling several plant species, some invertebrates, and some fish species. And we'll be adding several more plant species to this, including those identified by Fish and Wildlife Service regional horizon scans of species of concern for secondary spread to different parts of the country. And so here's just one example map. These are currently being generated right now, but this is a model fit for one species for lakes. And again, we're fitting models for lakes and streams separately because the predictors and what's important in those environments are different. And then at least for the species for the Northeast, we're also applying those models to future climate and land use to get an idea of species that might be shifting their distribution in the Northeast region. And with that, I'd like to thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I think as I mentioned throughout, we're really interested in getting input from people who are actually using INHABIT and finding out more about how they're using it and how we can make it more useful for people. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Great work. Thank you. We have any questions in the room? Then we'll go to the chat. We have a question.
I know you said that the species in this were like solicited by managers who are interested in them. Do you have any that are like maybe native to one part of the United States but invasive in others? If so, how do you handle that?
We do not. We've specifically limited the species that we've included in INHABIT to those that are not native to the contiguous US.
All right. Thank you again, Catherine. Great presentation. Thank you. One more round of applause. Okay. Any other business? Trying to bring up our slides again. There we go. Oh, that's yours.
Might have to find it on your computer.
Yeah. Any other business? Any questions? Try and find the end of our presentation. Friday. It's the weekend. I think everybody, I think everybody's looking forward to that. All right. Let me get this last slide up.
All right.
There you go. We don't want to miss the thank you slide. So we struggled to get that up there. If there's any more, no more questions or comments or thoughts, everyone have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for coming. The next meeting is September 13th. Location to be determined. It won't be here probably, but it will be somewhere. So we'll let you know. And please also remember Invasive Species Awareness Week, iNaturalist, June 1st through 9th. If you can take your phone and go out and iNaturalize something, that'd be a huge help. And register for the Long Island Invasive Species 2024 project on iNaturalist. All right, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.